Continuing with exercise 1, I have my PSD file here. It is nicely organized into a folder. So exercise 1, which is all nicely organized into my class folder, which I keep in documents and then pull out for class, right? The problem is if I double click on this project, it will open in the default program, which is Photoshop. And if I want to open it in Photopea instead, like I'll be demonstrating, because this is our freeware section, what I want to do is first open a new tab and just type in Photopea, and then drag and drop the file onto that home screen. Just like being open in Photoshop, it will have all the layers there for me to manipulate. And just like any PSD file, this is not something that we can put to Canvas. This is a working file type that's pretty big, takes up a lot of memory. So what I was showing you last class, in the last videos, was how to select different parts of the image to trim it down. But let's review some of the basics from last class. The first basic was to be working at the right resolution to start with. So we can always check that. Always good to check it when you start your project again in a new class period. Go to image, image size. And we want this to be in inches for height and width. We want it to be at least 8 by 10 inches. Anything bigger than 8 by 10 inches is fine, as long as it's not obscene. We don't want to do something that's 60 by 90 inches. So it just takes up way too much memory. And we want it to be at least 300 pixels per inch. I like to do 350. If yours is not that, you can force it to be that, but if you've rasterized any of your layers, that's going to really soften them out. And then I can help you bring those back in, clean them up. But a goal for this project is to be at full print resolution at 8 by 10 and to have your pixels be nice and clean. So when you zoom in or when you view it at what's called pixel to pixel resolution, which is 100% resolution, which means the pixels of the raster image match the pixel resolution of your screen, they should all look pretty good. And if they don't, you want to bring in different reference or clean it up. All right. The next thing I want to review is the transforming tools. When we brought an asset in, if you remember, I'll bring in a new asset here. It comes in with a transform box, that blue box around it. That blue box is how we can rotate, change the size. If we hold down Shift, we can distort it. And if we right-click within the transform box, we can do things like flip it horizontally. We can do things like distort from one corner. We can do things like play with the perspective, which is really helpful to match vanishing points. And we can do my favorite, which is warp. And warp, this is because I did perspective first. This is a perspective warp. Ooh, not enough RAM. So all of these, you'll see, they require a lot of processing until you hit return. And then they actually do all the things you're playing with and make them into pixels. And you can always hit Command Z after you've hit return to go back a few steps or go back a few steps in your history. So how do you get to free transform after you've brought it in? Because that's the step we're at now. We already have our projects. Now, actually I'll use that as a demo later. How do you rotate them or mess with them now? And that is up on the board. It's in red at the top. To get back to that transform box, you go to Edit and then Free Transform. And if you want the shortcut for it, it's those 3 keys that are up on the board and within the window here. Option Command T. If you're using Photoshop, it's just Command T. But if I hit just Command T in Photopea, which I'm going to do many times every day this semester, because I'm more used to Photoshop, right? If I just hit Command T, it will open up a new tab, because that's what happens in a browser, right? It doesn't hurt my work, it's a little annoying. So if I hit Option Command T, it will then give me a transform box. Notice that this transform box is tiny, and that's because this is not the transform box of the layer. This is a transform box of a little tiny 1 pixel selection I had active. So let's look at how transform works. If I hit Command D to deselect, and then I hit Option Command T, it will give me a transform box around the entire pixel range of that layer. But if I select something before I hit Option Command T, like this part of it, and then I hit Option Command T, it will give me a transform box only around my selection. So that is an important difference. And I can actually use that to modify my images. Right? So I don't need to just take the pixels where they are with the images. I can move them around by transforming internally within each layer, if I want. All right. The other way we're really modifying is by erasing, right? And instead of using the eraser tool, which we're not really learning yet, we're just using the lasso. So really the only tools we're learning are the move tool at the very top in Photopea, and then the lasso tool, which is the third one down. The important thing to remember is that it's layer specific. So if I want to erase something, I can lasso around it, but it will only affect the layer that is selected. Like that. I'm affecting this layer, so it erases all pixels within that selection only on that layer. So then, if I wanted to get rid of these kind of unsightly lines, I'm going to use my move tool. And with my move tool at the top, you'll see options. One option is auto select layer in the upper left-hand corner. If I have that checked, that means I can use the move tool to select different layers. And now I've had this one selected. But I recommend you uncheck that for this assignment, so instead you get used to navigating and selecting layers through the layer window. So this layer, I want to delete some of this stuff. Kind of cut it off, like trimming the edges. And then I can keep that selection active and then change to a new layer and then also delete it from this layer. So I get something that's a little bit more refined. Now I'm going to do Option Command T on this third layer with these black shapes and kind of move them around. Until maybe they have a more interesting placement. Hold down Shift and stretch them. So in this way, we're playing with the aesthetics of just the line quality, kind of matching up lines we like, revealing the lines we like, erasing the ones we don't, cutting them out. Now, do I like that better or do I not? I can always use Command T, or I can use my history to toggle between these. And the other way I like to use the Option Command T in Photopea is to click inside and warp. Especially when things look too rectilinear, like horizontal and vertical. This is like pushing silly putty around. I used to love transferring, newspaper comics onto silly putty and then stretching the silly putty. That's what the warp tool is like. Or if you're not familiar with that, it's like rolling out cookie dough. You can pull it from different edges until the things line up that you want to have line up. And then you hit return, like any transform. Now I've got this skull element here. I can move it around. This is the one I just brought in. Maybe I want it on the edge there. I can hit Option Command T and rotate it. I have a transform box. I can right click inside that transform box and warp it, like I was doing before to review. But if I want to delete from it, if I use my lasso and then try to cut away, it's going to say it has to be rasterized first. And that's because I brought it in, and when you bring it in, it comes in as a smart object. Smart object is helpful when you're transforming it, when you're growing it, rotating it, warping it. Once it's a size you want, then you right click on it and rasterize. What that does is it disconnects those pixels from the source image and from the source resolution. And instead, it saves those pixels, for good or bad, into your PSD file. So because this was a lower screen resolution, it looks less good in terms of resolution at full scale, especially if I do view pixel to pixel, than the other layers. So I'm going to show you how I can clean that up, but I have to rasterize it first. And now that I've rasterized it, I can also use my lasso and I can delete parts of it away that I don't think are helpful. Like all of this. Right? Now if I want those pixels to look better, it's rasterized, I can go up to image and adjustments and levels. Because you see the gray, it's a grayish black, not a full black. In levels and adjustments, we're going to be getting a lot of practice at this. This is your introduction to it. This is what's called a histogram. It shows you a map of all your pixels within the image. On the extreme left-hand side, these are your black pixels, pure black. On the extreme right-hand side, that's your white pixels. You can't really see it, but there's a huge spike of white pixels right on that right side. But if I want to make sure that my whites are the whitest they can be, I'm going to push this little white square, this is called a slider, a little bit to the left. And if I want to make my black pixels as black as they can be, you see there's a little spike here at about 80% black. That's these pixels. They can be blacker. So I can do that by moving the black slider past that mark. And now that black matches the other blacks. The midtone slider is something we'll play with in compositing in our first assignments. But for now, you can just leave that as the default. Okay, so before it was brighter, now it's darker, and everything's kind of cleaner. And then the other thing I can do to clean up the edge is what we went through a little bit before. I can use layer styles, double click on the image, on the layer of the image, and then click on stroke, and then play with either a black stroke to thicken it or a white stroke to thin it. But you'll see where my stroke shows up is outside of the white pixels in the image. So I'm going to undo that, Command Z. So before I can really define this edge, what I need to do is select all of those white pixels. So to show you what I'm talking about, I'll isolate that layer with the eyeballs. And I'm going to use this new selection tool that we talked about last class, the magic wand. And I'm going to change its options so that its contiguous is unchecked. Then I'm going to click on the white pixels anywhere in the image. And because contiguous is unchecked, the pixels just have to be similar to each other within 18%. And they need to be within the layer that's selected. They don't need to be touching. If contiguous is checked and I use the magic wand, those pixels also have to be touching. Now I can turn off the pixel in that layer and turn on the background, and you can see that the selection will move between multiple layers. But I want to delete them from this layer, so I just hit delete. Now I still have these kind of gray rasterized pixels, but what if I use the magic wand with contiguous unchecked and just select the purest black pixels? You see that? That will clean it up in a way. It will cut away these gray pixels. So how can I cut them away? Well, if I hit delete, that will just delete them. So instead, what I do is I go up to select options,